Welcome to the Awakened Goddess Show, your source for inspiration, wisdom, and personal discovery. The place to learn from a diverse mix of mentors, metaphysical experts, spiritual leaders, and best-selling authors from around the world. I'm your host, Angela Wilkinson. Join me as I explore the minds of my masterful guests while they share powerful insights and easy-to-use tools you can start using right away. Now, let's tap into the energy of the Awakened Goddess and be enlightened by today's guest. Nin Bebeau created 4 graduate schools in psychology and healing in Boulder, Colorado with her husband, Charles. She created a priestesshood called the Kadisha and has led women's rituals for over 20 years. She's also traveled around the world giving talks on how we can work together as a global family. She also went on specific peace missions to Beijing, Jerusalem, South Korea, and even North Korea. Nin is currently the founder and director of Florence Organizes, a bipartisan inclusive organization dedicated to protecting human rights and the environment. Now let's welcome Nin to the show. Hi, I'm Angela Wilkinson, and welcome to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show, where we co-create powerful, conscious conversations on the leading edge. Today I have Nin joining me, and we're going to be talking about the crossroads of time and how what we do now affects us in the future. And I suspect Nin has a lot of really cool stories that she's going to share with us, and particularly talking about the goddess and giving her life to the goddess. I'm really excited to hear about that. So, welcome, Nin.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. This is exciting.
It is very exciting. We met through Ruth Miller, a past guest on the show. She was a phenomenal woman to speak with and such a blessing. And she introduced us, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we've opened up the space here, and we've set the intention to really call in whatever is ready to be talked about. So it'll be interesting to see where this conversation goes. And one of the things I want to say is, talking with you, I feel like I am talking with my future self. We've had many parallel experiences in our lives, and it's just interesting that the more I hear you speak, the more I can see myself in you.
That's a wonderful thing. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I believe that there are parallel paths, and that throughout the lives, the people that have been significant to us come back in different roles at different times, but it's always companions on the path.
Yes.
And when you see somebody who's ahead of you, as I see Ruth Miller as being also my future self, as you say, that it's very exciting because it kind of gives you little hints of where you're going in your life.
Yes, and this beautiful location here was actually also where I interviewed Ruth, and so it's a delight to be back. This is your where you live here in Florence, Oregon, and so let's start playing. Let's dive into some magic here. As I said earlier, you have many stories. You have, it sounds like many lifetimes in one lifetime.
Absolutely. That is the theme of this lifetime. But how I came to the goddess is a good one as well.
Yeah.
Mine's all wrapped up with psychic events. And there have been many. And when I was 28 and I was going through my Saturn return, I finally decided to stop fighting it. Because every time an intuition came to me, I go, how do you know that? Is that true? I mean, like, I'm going to be embarrassed if I face a decision. Or what if somebody asks me, how did you come to that decision? I have to say, Spirit told me. And all of that seemed really scary. But when I was 28, I finally surrendered and I said, okay. And we made a contract. For 1 month, I would do exactly what she said without arguing. I didn't fulfill the contract at all. I continued to argue, but I obeyed. And so the very first thing she said to me was, we're leaving San Francisco. What? I love San Francisco. No, here's where you play. You have to do your work. And so we went on the road. me, my thumb, and the Great Mother.
Ah.
And she would tell me, you see the fourth car down, the white one, it's going to stop. It's going to take you as far as Aspen. And it was amazing that I was guided the whole time. And at one point, I was in this car with a man. He was in about mid-50s, a black man, and he was just fascinating. And then the mother says to me, ask him how his wife is now that she's out of the hospital. And I'm like, I can't say that. He's going to think I'm crazy. Are you going to stop arguing? All right. So I asked him, and he said, oh, yeah, she's doing much better now, blah, blah, blah. And never thought to even ask me, how did I know? Because he assumed he must have told me. And then at one point, I was a fruitarian. It's a very difficult thing to be when you're hitchhiking across country.
Yeah.
And I wound up in this podunk little town where there's nothing but 7-Eleven, and they had no fruit. And it was like, all right, I guess I'm not going to eat today. And then the voice says, who I called the teacher. And she said, go to the bookstore. The bookstore? Why should I go to... You're not going to argue, remember? All right. So I go to the bookstore, and there's no one there but the woman who runs the store. And we got into chatting, and she said, would you like to join me for lunch? Oh, I'm sorry, I only have fruit. And I got to eat that day. So that was quite marvelous. And I stayed with the teacher for a couple of years. She was a voice that would just guide me throughout my life, and it made me feel really safe.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, I had this bizarre feeling of falling through a tunnel, and there was nothing to grab onto. It was this loneliness beyond loneliness, this falling feeling. And so one night, after I had met my husband, I woke him up, and he talked to me for a few minutes and went back to sleep. So I woke him up. So he talked to me for a few minutes and went to sleep. And I went to wake him up a third time, and he's like, what do you want? Let me sleep. And I was like, nothing. I was just lonely, you know. And so then she said, why do you keep bothering people? Turn to me.
Mm.
And I did. And this thing that had happened all of my life stopped that day. And after that, whenever this feeling of lost in space or, alone beyond alone, I would turn to her, and it was always gone after that. So that began this great trust between us. And then after a year of being married, I became pregnant, and she disappeared.
Mm.
It was the most horrible feeling.
Yeah.
It was like being in love with somebody and they just walk out the door and don't show up again. I mean, it was totally strange to be alone after having been guided for so long. But then my son was born, and the mother arrived. Now, this was auditory as well as the teacher, but this was kinesthetic. And I was living inside of a cushy, bosomy hug. And my ability to love became vast. And I just loved everyone and had opportunities to gift people left and right with everything that would come to me and through me.
Mm.
And guitars would come out of nowhere, and I'd be able to give them to street artists who'd been ripped off, or clients to other therapists, or just whatever would come through my life. Things kept coming through to give to people. And it was such a selfless state of being. I was so utterly content I needed nothing.
Mm.
So I gave to everyone. And it was extraordinary. And then about a year or two later, I was lying down under my husband's arm, listening to music for a couple of hours. It was a very peaceful state of being. And all of a sudden, I started gasping and giggling at the same time. It was a bizarre feeling. And but it wasn't the first time, because I had worked in a cancer clinic down in Mexico. That was a very high energetic place where whenever somebody died in the cancer clinic, the dolphins would come and sing. It's a very magical place. And that, when I was down there, I had this feeling of having my heart stretched open so that I could love more. But it was a very odd feeling.
Yeah. Probably not necessarily a comfortable feeling.
Oh, no. But it was profound. You
Yeah.
know? And so I was lying there, and I'm giggling and gasping, and my husband said, what's happening? And I said, well, there's this woman standing over me, and she's pulling my heart apart. And so now, after having an auditory, the teacher, and having a kinesthetic, the mother, there was a visual, and that seemed really bizarre, And I could see her, and she had short black hair, and she was beautiful, and she was really, literally pulling my heart apart. And so Charles, being very practical, said, "Ask her what she wants." Well, I had been sexy since I was 7 years old. I was always just naturally, not for anybody else, but just for myself. I loved the feeling of posturing and acting this way and all. And all of a sudden here, I was wearing my husband's jeans and flannel shirts, and I wasn't being sexy at all, and I was just loving it. Being invisible for the first time seemed so burdenless. It was great. And so when I asked her, "What do you want?" she said, "Perm your hair like you always do." "No, I don't want to perm my hair. I like it schlubby." And my husband said, "What'd she say?" And I said, "She said perm your hair." And he said, "Great." And I said, "No." He said, "Is that all she wants?" I asked, "Is that all you want?" No, I want you to go back to shaving your legs." "I don't want to shave my legs. I like hairy legs. It's the first time I've had hairy legs. Let me have hairy legs." And he goes, "No, that's great." And I go, "Wait a minute. Am I having an argument with an incarnate and a non-incarnate being at the same time?" She wanted me to go back to being in my power and not be invisible. The next day, I was on the porch doing yoga, and when I came up into the cobra, she was standing over me. And I said, "What is your name?" Expecting her to say, "Warrior woman." And she said, "Yana." And I thought, "Yana? What's Yana?" But I went in and I looked it up in my ancient dictionary, and it said the goddess of the underworld. And it was like, oh, birth, death, transformation, healing. Oh, yes, this is someone to respect.
Yeah.
And then Yana kept me awake from 11 to 4 taking dictation every night for several weeks. And she gave me a model for transforming the world. It was very practical, and it built on this whole structure. It had a bank involved, it had projects, it had education. It was an incredible project that she gave me. And then when I turned 40, I tried to activate it. Within 6 months, I was exhausted. I mean, I was running a graduate school. I had little children. I was doing psychotherapy. I was teaching. I couldn't possibly do more. And so I started this healing center, which was part of her process. And no, I got too tired. So I asked her for a divorce. I asked the spirit guide for a divorce. And she said, "No, look what I've brought into your life. It'll be gone." And she did. She brought me this incredible ability to structure and carry many, many lives in one life and all these activities. And I said, "I don't care. I need rest." And so, "You need an older woman." So she left. And 1 year later, she came back once. And she said, "You don't have to do it all. You just have to write it up. And someone will do it."
Yeah.
And that's one of the books I have not released yet. I've published several of my books, but that one I haven't. I'm still holding on to it, but I feel it around me lately.
Yeah.
That just today I asked a woman if she'd have coffee with me so I could begin to tell her about this vision. And we could begin to just look at the possibility of releasing it.
Well, and I love that you're sharing it publicly now.
Yes. Well, I just feel that today's the day.
Yeah.
It was just a couple hours ago I was telling this woman about it, and it just feels, I feel those seeds, like one person asked me a question and answer it, and then somebody totally different, in totally different context, asks you a similar question, and it's like they wake up, it's getting to be the time. So,
well, and I think that's a great place to just highlight is that things do have divine timing.
Totally.
And we can try to force things, but that doesn't work. That just makes us burnt out and tired and it not work. And then there's the timing of the goddess and the great mother.
Well, I have this mantra that brings me quiet. And the mantra is, if it's my destiny, it will absolutely happen. And if it's not my destiny, there's nothing I can do to make it happen. So
that's beautiful.
When I feel, I've also set up a yes and no in my body. I have these 2 meridians that I close, and these 2 are pull. And if it's a yes, it resists, and if it's a no, it comes through. And That's applied kinesiology, and it works on most people unless their electrolytes are diminished. So I ask all the time. I ask, should I eat this? Should I do this? I ask the mother a yes or no question like that. Otherwise, I use the oracles. Primarily, I have two different tarot decks
Mm.
for a different two different things, and then I use the Mayan oracle for the teachings of the day. And every day I do that so that I have my how I should bring the energy to the day and what I can expect, what is the highest self and what is my lessons, and then that way I'm in dialogue. But I also hear most of the time
Mm-hmm.
just to have the question, and then whether I like it or not, I do it. And
Yeah.
that's how I got to Florence because I was told to come here.
Yeah, because you were living, weren't you living, was it New York that you were
Yeah.
living in? Yeah.
Yeah, I went to stay with my sister who lives in this beautiful house in Long Island and right next to Port Jefferson, which is a very gorgeous colonial town and magical place. And I was teaching tarot classes, and every time I taught a class, it morphed into another class, and I had several classes of those going. And then, right in the middle of a tarot class, this woman stands up and she goes, "Oh, I must study astrology with you." So then I started astrology class, and then that morphed into two more. And so I was carrying all these tarot and astrology classes, plus I had readings all day long, and all the money was just pouring in. And it was like, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
This is successful, and I'm doing fun things and all of that. And right in the middle of it, I sit down one morning to meditate, and the mother says, "Move to Florence, Oregon." Like, what? Where? It's not the first time. She sent me to Montana once, and I'd spent a year there, and that was marvelous.
Yeah.
And so I'm at this point, I have no resistance. I just automatically go, "Oh, isn't that interesting? I'll obey," and I do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just packed up and came out here. I Googled it first to make sure Florence was a cute looking place, you know. But she always sends me to beautiful places. But the other thing was when the voice said, "Go to Florence, Oregon," I had a picture. It came with a picture. And the picture was of a house with rolling meadows around it and the water right in front of it, like spitting distance from the house. And I actually live in that house today.
Mm-hmm.
It is like 2 yards from the river, and I saw this body of water in the vision, and I thought it was a lake. And I knew the shopping and everything was on the other side of the lake, and I thought I had to row across. They didn't show me the bridge. The bridge is right next to my house.
Yes.
So, so Spirit brought me here, and I now understand why, because um, I'm involved in so much political work and so much. It, so I receive so much support
Mm-hmm.
from this community that all things are possible.
Well, and I have to, because I've been here quite a bit, for several years, and I love this that you're talking about the spiritual community because I never realized there was one here, and I'm really quite sensitive to energy and whatnot, and so I think that another thing for people to hear is that spiritual communities are found everywhere, even in the tiniest towns.
Mm-hmm.
And they not may not be making a lot of noise or are flamboyant about their presence, but that if you look for a community, you will find one, even if it's just a few people.
Mm-hmm. I have traveled all over the United States. In fact, when I came from San Francisco here, I had this guidebook said Pilgrim's Guide to the Planet Earth. And it looked like one of those books from the Automobilist Society Association that tells you where all the restaurants are and the hotels. This one told you where all the natural food stores and health stores and bookstores and metaphysical centers. So you could go there and meet the family, and from this family, all things would come. And I found that all over the United States, I mean, in the cities, you have metaphysical bookstores. You know, you have these overt things. But in podunk nowhere, if you know, there's an underground,
Yeah.
and wherever I went, there was always there was always a family. You know, there was always a place where people gathered. And here in Florence, Florence is a microcosm because there is a very strong Republican Party here. There is a very strong spiritual. There's a very strong religious. There's a very strong everything. If you find it, if you are it, it
Mm-hmm.
finds you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like that everywhere. You draw to you what you are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you spoke about loneliness
Hmm.
and feeling that loneliness, and I think that if we allow ourselves, we can become isolated and not connect with other people. And so, yeah, it's beautiful when we can connect with people when, especially when we're feeling lonely, or we feel like, oh, if you're in New York, it's like it's so big and there's so many people, you can still feel lonely in a place like New York.
Well, I haven't actually had trouble connecting with people most of my life.
Oh,
It's
that
just
doesn't come
that
as a surprise.
it's just that um, there's a place within my soul that is in love with the mother
Hmm.
and always has been. And so when I was growing up, the woman who was my mother, who was a marvelous lady, but she in no way resembled the Divine Mother. And so the distance between her humanness and the perfection that I was seeking for my soul made me a very discontented, and I was a difficult child, which I apologized for the rest of my life. But I began to realize that some of us are born that way. We're born with an ideal of perfection. We don't give our mothers a chance to be who they are.
Hmm. Yeah, we hold such high expectations and standards for them.
Yes. But I've been blessed to meet a lot of goddesses, and they definitely satisfy this deep place in my soul.
Hmm.
It's just there can be years, decades between the time you meet one goddess and another, and that can create the loneliness.
Hmm. But don't you find that you can meet those people along your journeys just like in an instant? You like have that connection, you see that person, it's like you connect, you look at each other in your eyes. It's
Hmm.
almost like love at first sight.
Yes, that reminds me of a time I was in San Francisco and I was on this bus. And I'm just standing there holding on to the bus. And there's another man in the bus and he's also standing there holding on. And he looked at me and I looked at him. And these lightning flashes went between us. And
Ooh.
it was just, and it's just, standing there kind of like staring at each other. And then when I got off at my stop, he got off with me. And he just said, I want to tell you, I felt it too.
Oh.
And then he got on the next bus and went away. But it was one of those,
Yeah.
there's this word namaste.
Yeah.
The divine presence in me recognizes the divine presence in you. I mean, it wasn't a flirtation because he didn't stop to ask my number or any of that. You know, it was just like, I really see you
Hmm.
in the sense of Avatar, the movie. I see you. And so, and the odd thing is, he really looked a whole lot like my soulmate, Charles, who I eventually married. Um, so it was a recognition that there was a divine connection between us,
A little preview into the future.
a preview into the future. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's like we're really living so many. There's so many dimensions that are happening all at the same time, and that's one of the things I love. It's like I get so excited when I think about how you can jump timelines into other dimensions and become like this whole other version of yourself.
I've definitely had a number of lives in this lifetime.
Yeah.
And now for a quick break. I'd like to thank Healing Ways for sponsoring this week's episode of the Awakened Goddess Show. Healing Ways is on a mission to help alternative health practitioners and lightworkers to get noticed in a bigger way. If you'd like to learn how you can become part of a professional network dedicated to the field of alternative medicine and open yourself to attracting more of the clients you want, visit healingways.com and make sure to use promo code AWAKE to receive 2 months free membership. Now back to the show.
The most radical one, I think, was when I was 22 and I was into all the wild erotic adventures I could find.
No.
And then in those wild adventures, I met this fellow, and that's so X-rated, I can't even go into it. But the end product of it was he fell in love with me, and he followed me out to San Francisco. But it took him 9 months to finish up his job and his life and buy a car and do all the things he needed to do to get out there. By the time he arrived in San Francisco, I was a spiritual disciple dressed in white.
He missed his
I
chance.
mean, he was coming out for the chains and high heels, and he arrives and I'm in the pure white.
You had found the goddess. The
Oh.
goddess had found you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to kind of go back to your timeline with the goddess, and so people may be wondering, well, how did you connect with her initially? Like, it sounded like it just came out of the blue. Was that your experience? Just like one day, it was like you had that connection?
Well, it was always. It was always because my very first memory was when I was 4 years old, and I was sitting in front of the television. I was born the same year as television. I'd walked out of the room, and I came running back in because the show was coming back on. Howdy Doody, the only show there was. And the doll was lying on the floor, and as I ran by, the doll looked like it moved. And I told my mother she was going to have a baby. And she tried to explain to me that it was, a visional distortion, how when you run by, and I go, no, meant something. And I knew that vision wasn't the doll, that was a symbol. So that was my first memory. So
Wow.
there was always something there. And then when I was 7, I had dreams, and they were prophetic, and they came true. And Spirit said, you can't tell anyone these dreams or you'll be burned at the stake. And I knew what that meant. And so, of course, television didn't have any of that. It was still Howdy Doody time, So there was just this knowing. And after that, I suppressed it. I fought it. I denied it. I didn't want to be so weird. People were already saying I was crazy. I didn't want to be crazy. So I rejected it until I was 28 when I allowed her in. And so I lived with spirit guides for those years, and they were more guides and more things in the psychic realm. And then I met Charles, and Charles introduced me to the goddess Inanna. And it was incredible. It was like falling in love totally. And for the next 6 years, I wrote a book of her life. And I was immersed in that other world, her world, where the government of it it was a perfect culture in so many ways. The world of the goddess was so balanced. And she taught me so much. And it just became more and more and more of a reality until I finally reached the point where I could see that it was only pain to resist. Because she would say, don't do this. And I immediately go, I'll test it.
I'm going to do it anyway.
I'm going to do it anyway. Right. Like this man invited me for a date. And I'm getting ready to go. And she says, he's not going to be there. He's going to stand you up.
Yeah.
So therefore, I go a half hour early. And I wait a half hour later till it's a full, hour. And
You just had to make sure.
Absolutely. And then I got so angry that I went to be a woodworker, and I was going for job interviews. And it was terrifying because I'm competing with men, and I was trying to dress, really powerful, manly-like for all these job interviews. It was so scary. So that day, when this man didn't show up, and I was furious, I said, well, I'll just call up the next person and do an interview. I didn't even look in the mirror to notice that I was dressed in a white dress. I was dressed in the most lovely little goddessy thing. I didn't look like a woodworker at all, and I went off for the interview.
Yeah.
But I got that job.
I was going to say, you were so inspired. I'm sure that things just lined up.
Totally. Every time he said, but you're only, and I go, yes, I am, but. And I just didn't resist, and the goddess made it happen. And from then on, I just learned more and more and more to surrender until it finally got to the point where my life was so extraordinary because I just listened.
Yeah.
And I ask for everything, and I may want that thing, but if she says no, then I just don't. And I'm left with when you tune up to a certain vibrational frequency, it's there's a line where you get more and more spiritual, and then you go more and more earthly, and it's actually a continuum. And I have to get very careful when I go up to a higher spiritual vibration that I don't sacrifice the physical. Because, if you can really be a fruitarian, you can really be a breatharian, you can learn how to do those things, but it's not necessarily good for the physical body.
And it doesn't sound very fun.
Oh, well.
That's subjective, but...
all right, there is pleasure in eating, but there's pleasure in getting high.
Yes.
And when you get into certain vibrational frequencies,
Yes.
to feel like, to wake up every morning and go, it's a brand new day with the enthusiasm of a 3-year-old. That's a pretty good high right there. And when you are in the bosom of the mother, when you have absolute trust, when you know that I had so many experiences where my foot's coming down to the ground, there's no ground, and when my foot touches, there's ground. I woke up one day and I had no money. Like zero is no. Not like, I didn't have enough in the bank. I had no pennies.
Yeah.
And I didn't have money for gas. I didn't have money for food. I didn't have anything. And it was like, oh, well, we'll see how we'll get through this day. But by the end of the day, someone who owed me some money, out of the blue, decided to send me $100 that day, And it was like that. It was like I would wake up in the morning and I go, I really need this. I remember one day, my husband had been very sick, and all of a sudden he started getting well.
Yeah.
And we started arguing. We've never argued. We'd been together for decades. No, we'd been together, decades, right?
Yeah.
And we'd never argued. We had 30 years together. And we'd never argued. All of a sudden we're arguing. This is bizarre. He's finally getting well. So I just didn't even know who to ask for guidance. So I said, Mother, I need to know what's going on. 5 minutes later, the phone rings.
Yeah.
And it's my assistant. I was running a graduate school, and she was my assistant, my secretary, my number one. And she never called me up to talk to her about her life. All of a sudden that day, 5 minutes later, she calls me up to tell me about her son. And she's talking about how last year he was a nerd, but he grew up during the summer, and now he's really got his act together, but the kids are still treating him like he's that nerd of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. That when my husband was so ill, I had to tell him how to do everything. And now I hadn't recognized that he had gotten back to a certain level of self-possession, and I was still telling him how to do everything, and he felt that I was condescending, or, he was insulted by my telling him this. I wasn't recognizing the change.
Mm-hmm.
So her calling and telling me about her son gave me the answer I asked for.
Yes.
And I've had so many of those where I just go, I really need to know. And 5 minutes later, the phone rings.
Mm.
And so it's like that. Or I'm lying on the beach and two men walk by having a conversation. And I just hear what they say. It's idle. It's nothingness. But it rings with a feeling in my body, and it's guidance for me.
Yeah, and we all receive this information. So I love that we're talking about this, because I think it helps other people that are watching and listening, recognize, oh, you know what, maybe I have been getting guidance, but I haven't either been listening, or I didn't hear what I wanted to hear, so I just ignored it.
Exactly.
And I love that you have learned that now you follow it every time you get this guidance. And even if it's not what you want, if it's not the path that you would like to choose, you still honor the guidance that you're being given.
Right. You have to learn your own systems.
Yeah.
There's a sensation in your body that is yes. There's a sensation in your body that's no. No is often tightening, like a brow tightening or a icky feeling in your stomach. And I had a class where I would tell, I think it was in Tarot, because I was teaching them to use their intuition more. And I had everybody go around and tell a story that's absolutely not true. You know, you can stick close to the truth if you want to, but there are details that are out and out lie.
Yeah.
And as you tell this lie story as though it's true, um, monitor the body and notice where you have this uncomfortable feeling. Then I'd have them go around and tell a story that was impeccably true and get that other feeling, the more expansive feeling. And we'd do it a few times until they realized that this icky feeling was always their no, and this expansive feeling was always a yes. So at least if you set up a yes or no in your body, but you can also do it with the testing of your fingers. And make sure it's the pinky and the thumb, because that's two different meridians. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Okay.
And but there's muscle testing your arm as well.
Yep.
And once you have set up a yes and no in your body, you can start asking for guidance. But you have to obey it, because if you don't, then the link is broken.
Yes.
And when you do, extraordinary opportunities out of left field come all the time. The more you do it, the more it works. The more you watch synchronicity, the more synchronicity works. One time I was sitting on the porch. I had clients that sometimes came up to my house. I was a psychotherapist. So this woman is on the porch and she's talking and she says, I feel so, it's such a feel. Content-free communication. She is not saying anything. But this is not going to go anywhere unless I can jump in and help her figure out what she's feeling. This is what's needed.
Yeah.
So at that moment, I kind of close my eyes and tune in for the mother to answer and tell me what I should say to this woman. At that moment, a road machine goes by. And it's like, oh no, this is irritating. He's making so much noise that I can't concentrate. And then all I go, duh. If this is the question, this is the answer. And that's the art.
Yes.
If the question comes up at that moment, whatever happens at that moment is the answer. There's a whole science called horary astrology, where you walk in and you say, I have an issue. The person will draw up a chart and tell you what your issue is, because if the question has come to ripeness, the answer is right there. So this machine goes by, I recognize that this is the answer, and I start to describe the machine. I go, it's big. Yeah, it feels really big. It's heavy and ominous. Yes, it's heavy and ominous. And it just feels like it's rattling through my whole being. Yes! And all I was doing was coming up with whatever words I could to describe the machine.
Yeah.
And she thought I was seeing into her soul.
Wow.
The other thing that was kind of novel was, for a while, it's very bizarre. For a while, when I was doing psychotherapy and I was doing a lot of trance work, I would have people take off their shoes, and I would hold that little ankle place where the pulse is. And I would say, go back in time to this event. And when they got to a really triggered event, the pulse would start moving. Because your whole body is a microcosm. It's a hologram of what the reality of your being is. And so when it would pulse, I go to that memory. And then I'd ask questions, and I'd go, yes, this one. And the person would feel like I'm in their soul, seeing their visions with them.
Wow.
Because their body would pulse every time it's significant. So there's something going on. When you like the energies are moving through your body all the time. There are, and just learning to tune in, to trust, that's big capital letters.
Yeah.
Trusting is the hardest lesson of all of them. It's like jumping off the diving board and not sure there's any water in there. But if you learn that there is water always, and it's extraordinary, and you are safe, even if it's the 11th hour, 1 minute to 12.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been rescued 1 minute to 12 so many times, but the trust allows me to go to the limits. One time, I woke up. I was in my late 50s, or I was in my 50s. I was in menopause, and I woke up dreaming I was in labor. And I woke up and I was in labor. But I had clients all day, so I ignored it, and I went off, and I'm doing my sessions all day long. The pain is getting more intense, but I'm going through it all day. And then I went to and then I had some time at the end of the day. I went to the bathroom, and I felt like I was having labor pains and a head popped out. And I felt it, and I've had 3 children. I know what it feels like with the veins and everything. And being the brilliant person that I am, I yanked on it. That was probably not the right thing to do because it was embedded in my womb.
Oh, wow.
And so I called up my girlfriend who is a doctor, and she said, well, I'll be right. I was just closing up the office, but I'll wait for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I go there. She says surgery. I said, Mother, should I do surgery? Mother says no. So now I have to figure out whether I'm going to go with the mother or not. And the doctor says, well, you could probably live 3 days at this rate because of the level of blood that was pouring out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mother, are you sure? I'm sure. Okay. So now I have to put my life on the line.
Yeah.
Because if I listen to the doctor, it's surgery tomorrow. If I listen to the mother, I take it to the edge. I said, okay, well, you probably have 3 days to find me a doctor that can do this. And my husband and this doctor got on the phone, and they called around. And at one point on the next day, I was lying on my back, and I turned over on my side. And it was the most extraordinarily painful thing I ever experienced. Boing, boing, boing. I mean, there was no blood. They finally found a doctor, and my husband carried me down the stairs, put me in the car, took me into this doctor, and they couldn't find any blood. They couldn't find any pulse. And he found a way to strangle this thing and cauterize it.
Hmm.
And it was some kind of a tumor that was attached to me.
Wow.
But those are the tests.
Yeah.
It's not, they weren't like random, and they weren't meaningless. Because by the mother testing me like that, would I put my life on the line? Would I believe her to that extent? I did, and I survived it, and I learned to absolutely trust. And I've had so many of those. I've had so many extraordinary experiences that took me to the very, very edge, but she always showed up and saved my life. My life has been in danger many, many times. But she always shows up and saves me. I'm right here, I'm still here. And it gives me so much power right now.
Yeah.
I find that my ability to love is the person I've met. I know nothing about them, but I can totally love them. I don't have within my being the concept of enemy. And I can go into places that people go, oh my God, I would never go in there. I mean, that's the enemy, I don't have that concept. I am the mother, so everyone on earth is my child. And I have been given a mission to, in any way I can, further the way of peace. And the biggest thing on the planet right now is we stand on the verge of globalization. That is not going to be diverted. We are absolutely, definitely going into globalization. So what does that mean? There are those that would like to make, as in the movies, the military state and the androids and love is forbidden and all these weird control, fear-based, divisionary consciousness.
Us and them.
Us and them. But that's not the only vote. If the people who have been, quote, in the middle frame, they're not fanatics in any way, those who love life would become as vocal and as active, as I see they are doing since Trump emerged, standing up for just the earth, standing up for the air and the water, for health and well-being, for human rights, if we all just stand up, there's a lot more people on the earth that are not fanatical and not greedy and not hoarders. It's good to be rich. Everyone should be rich, but no one should hoard. No one should have billions of dollars while other people starve. These resources belong to Mother Earth, and they should be distributed, and they should be shared, and we should have mutual cooperation on this earth. And we can. That's the thing. We can.
Yeah.
All we have to do is wake up and work together. And that's what I see with the Women's March in January and our organization called FOR and the huddles around the country and the marches around the world. and women are leading.
Yes.
And men are following. We have men in all our organizations, but they're in a following place because it's the women's time to lead.
Mm-hmm. Now for a quick break. I'm glad you're enjoying the Awakened Goddess show. I want to remind you the show is community supported. If you found value from watching or listening, I invite you to show your support with a donation. To get details on how you can help, click the link in the show notes or visit theawakenedgoddess.com/donate. Now back to the show.
The goddess was about equality.
Yeah.
And if we look at the ages, and that's what the crossroads of time is all about, the ages, and all cyclical rivers cross in our time. There are cycles. Plato talked about a cycle of 26,000 years. The Mayan calendar talked about 26,000 years. And Plato said that in that big frame of time, there are months or ages, like the Aquarian age, the Pisces age, and those things. And then there's the Star of Bethlehem that heralded the birth of Jesus. And that's a 500-year cycle. And all of these cycles cross in our lifetime. And the ancients looked at our time and said, oh my God, would you like to live then? And they said, no. You don't want to live in our time? Why? Look at this is a great time. They go, no, because how could you live when every aspect of life is subject to change? We live in a vortex of change.
Yes.
How we find our lovers and who our lovers are. Well, they used to have matched marriages. Now you can not only pick your lover, but your lover can be of your own gender if you wish.
Yeah.
Your lover could be of any nationality or color if you wish. We have absolute choice.
Yeah.
That was never there before.
And you can find them with a swipe of a finger.
And you can, that's right. And it used to be you could change a person's mind with armies and weapons and massives of money and effort. Now you just sit there with a computer and go, brrr, and you can change people's minds. You know, it used to be that your job was the same job your father had and his father before him. There was no choice. Now it's your choice. The food always came from your own garden, or you traded somebody next door for what their food was. Now we eat food from the other side of the globe. You can buy something from Australia even. You know, every aspect of our lives is subject to change. We, this generation on the planet, has the most extraordinary opportunity and the most extraordinary responsibility, because what we do in our lives, our own personal little lives, sets the pattern for all these ages to come. When we have a fight with our beloved, a normal squabbling of what the duties are and who's taking out the garbage, in that holographic microcosm of the way the world is, we're setting new patterns. When a man chooses to take care of the children for these few years so she can go out there and make an impact. And I had one relationship where he worked 6 months and I worked 6 months. We never planned it, but when I worked 6 months, I was an artist, he was an artist. But you have to make money too.
Yeah.
And so
it's your turn, now it's mine.
When he worked, I was home doing my art. And when I worked, he was home doing his art, and I would come home and he'd massage my feet and make dinner. Heaven, you know?
Yeah.
And that's never been in history before, that we should share equally the jobs and the pleasures and be able to both have our art and our income. So this is the time we live in where there's so many opportunities for change. And it becomes very important that we seed and recognize we're seeding patterns for the future. Now, we can take the past, the militarism, the patriarchal dominance, the father-daughter relationship. We can take that oppression and exploitation and imperialism, and we can bring that all into the future and make it toxic as well. Or we can choose to do something revolutionarily new and become sisters and brothers and friends. And I have this, but I need that. And I'll give you this and give me that. Or the way I've lived my life is I give here and I receive there. You know, there are those people I give to all the time. They don't give me anything. It doesn't matter, because I give to them whatever they need, but I know that when I need, it comes from here.
Well, and that goes back to the piece about trust.
Yes.
and trusting that that we really need to give freely without that expectation of getting something in return.
Right.
Because then that just adds negative energy. Like people can feel that when you ask or when you give without a clear
Right.
from a clear place.
Exactly. You know, what we do in the world is important, but the intent with which we do things is psychically far more important.
Yes.
If there
Yeah.
is a St. Peter at the gate, he's going to weigh your intentions. And it's interesting back in the Egyptian culture, when you died and you went into the afterlife, there was a place of not so much judgment as they took your soul and they weighed it against a feather.
Mm.
What was being weighed? Not love, not generosity, but it was regret.
Mm. Wow.
And what leads to regret is fear. And so
Very
it
dense
was
energy.
the negative energy that you're still holding on to the grievance. This is what they weighed against a feather. And you could not continue on until you purified yourself of that.
Mm.
You know, if somebody steals something from you, you've lost your possession.
Yeah.
But then you hate them and you rage about it and you tell everybody about it. You've lost your peace of mind. So why would you give away your peace of mind when you've already lost something? So instead of losing one thing, you lose two things? It's not worth the emotional drainage.
Right.
You know,
It's
if
true.
that thing needs to leave you, it leaves you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had my laptop stolen when I moved to New York, and it took me a good while to get over that. And I went through like the all the court proceedings, and then I still never ended up with. I had a settlement, but I never got anything. And then it was just like this interesting, because the laptop represented like a piece of my identity. It was like I had so much wrapped up in it that it was just this opportunity to see and look at, well, what's this energy about?
Exactly. That's what all life is.
Mm-hmm.
When it's a good thing or a bad thing, that's not the significant relevance. The
Right.
relevance is, what am I being told or guided?
Mm-hmm.
Recently, when I moved to Florence and all, or I moved to New York, I left all of my possessions in my daughter's house because she has a very large house and she has all these empty rooms. So she gave me a room to put all my possessions in, and then she distributed some of the furniture around the house. And she was recently robbed, and they took everything.
Oh.
So when I traveled around the world, I collected all these treasures,
Yeah.
and I had all these beautiful things, and they're all gone.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Every once in a while, there's like a burp of, oh.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I just go, and that was my past life,
Mm-hmm.
you know? It more things come to me all the time. I can't waste my energy regretting that. Communication comes physically, mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and it's like we need to really be in the flow of the energy. And it, like you say, if something needs to leave our life, whether gently or forcibly, there's a reason for it.
right. And the more we're able to go with the flow of it
Mm-hmm.
without attaching any kind of punishment. Because some people go,
Yeah.
what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong in my last lifetime to cause the bad thing today?
Mm-hmm.
Karma is never crime and punishment. Karma is always the balance, you know? And sometimes we care so much for a person, or we care so much for possessions that we clutch on to them,
Mm-hmm.
or we identify with them. But we need to move on. And fate has to pry our fingers loose, and it hurts.
It does.
But it's just the measure of how much we're attached to it. And I
Mm-hmm.
always feel like the further I go down, the higher I go up.
Yeah.
And I found, recently especially, I just had this experience where I thought I was depressed. It lasted 2 weeks. And I realized they usually last 2 weeks. And what it was that there's some problem. The
Mm-hmm.
problem brings up an issue. I get upset about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get all in a fluff. And when the smoke clears, I thrust forward. And what I thought was a depression is actually all my forces are being requisitioned inward. And it changes some part of my soul, some part of my perspective, some part of my resistance is being boiled away. And I get to that place of greater surrender. And then I thrust forward with a whole new direction. And so instead of going, oh, I'm depressed, there's a problem, I'm in my state of endarkenment and people are watching, I just go, oh, well, that's the way it is, you know? And I go through it, but I also go through it knowing that I'm going to be gifted when I come out. And some of the darkest periods have given birth to the most amazing things. So I trust it afterwards. When I'm in endarkenment, I'm there in endarkenment. Let's just be clear about it. Oh, woe is me, the lies and the world. But 2 weeks later, it's like, you know, it's okay.
Well, you're able to reflect back and see why, the purpose of what the experience brought for you.
And that's probably an important thing, that even in enlightenment, you still have to go through the endarkenment. You still have to go through that process, as wrenching as it can be. But the difference between a high level of consciousness and a lower level of consciousness is what do you do with it? You know, somebody...
how quickly are you able to surrender?
Exactly. You know, somebody steps on your foot. Now, you can't help going, ugh! It's a natural impulse. But at that moment, you know, the first thing we're not responsible for. I think it's just natural instinct. But then there's a moment of choice. And that's where this level of consciousness comes in. Do you go into victim? Do you go into aggressor? Do you go into revenge? Or do you go into meaning and purpose and awakenment? And, oh, was that shock supposed to make me reflect? Was I supposed to see something, understand something? How do I integrate this into my understanding? And when something is taken away, what's being brought in? And every beginning has an ending, and every ending has a beginning, because life is cyclical. And so if we begin to just flow with that and understand that, stop looking in that direction where it's going away and look around and see what's left. There's a card, a tarot card called the Five of Cups. And there are 2 spilled cups. 3 spilled cups, but there's 2 behind you that's still there. And so you could be looking at the 3 spilled cups going, woe is me. Or you could turn around and see what new is coming.
Beautiful. That is like such wisdom. And I think that this conversation that we had, we went through all of the terrain, and I really loved hearing about your experiences following the guidance of the goddess and the beauty in that, and how potent that energy is, and that when we listen and we follow, whether we like it or not, that there is so much more available to us. The freedom and the abundance and all of that, all of the things that are important, that we trust are there and waiting for us, are there and waiting for us. I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. This was like an amazing, fun ride, and just like we went everywhere, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. You have so much vivaciousness and so much joy. I've been so looking forward to doing this with you, because just being with you is so fun.
Well, likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show. I hope you enjoyed today's guest and got something you can start using in your life right away. For more spiritual insights and to listen to more episodes, subscribe to The Awakened Goddess Show at theawakenedgoddess.com and discover wisdom that'll change your life.